Welcome to Exploring Computing. Today's video is Linking Web Pages, Part 1, Making Links. So this is going to be the first in a series of videos where we're going to take a look at different aspects of creating web pages, combining both the HTML and the cascading style sheets. And of course, one of the things that makes the web really interesting is the fact that we can link one web page to another web page. Remember, that's one of the key parts of hypertext markup and language, the hypertext component. So we're going to go ahead and start off with that. Now, we have already talked a little bit about how to make links between web pages, but it's going to turn out that there's a lot more to it, both strictly on the HTML side and also when combining it with cascading style sheets. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I've got a diagram representing that we've got a computer, www.stanford.edu, and it has a bunch of files in it. And we're going to assume that these files are all in the same folder and that they are in the top level directory for whatever www.stanford.edu is using to serve up web pages. And I'll talk a little bit more detail about how that works a little bit later. But for now, just we're trying to keep things simple. So we've got these two files and they are in the main location where the www.stanford.edu server is going to be serving up files. So I've got a laptop I'm going to go ahead and visit, and I'm going to have the example.html file sent to me. And so remember, what we're looking at here is how to create links between pages. So what we're going to take a look at is, let's say I'm currently viewing the web page associated with the example.html file that has been downloaded on my laptop. And now that web page, example.html, has a reference to another web page. And it's got a reference to the another.html web page. And so this is what the link might look like. And we've seen this before. So, this says, oh, I've got a hypertext transport protocol request for the web server, www.stanford.edu. And I want to get to the file another.html. And then the text, another web page, which is between the A start and the A end tag. That's text that's going to be linked. We'll talk a little bit later about what it's going to look like and how we might change the appearance. Okay, it turns out that we can actually shorten this. And instead of saying www.stanford.edu/another.html, we can just say another.html. And this is what it's referred to as a relative reference. What we had before, where we had the full thing, including the web server and the protocol HTTP, that's what we refer to as an absolute reference. So you have this choice when you're linking from one web page to another web page. You need to decide, am I going to use an absolute reference with the full HTTP and the server, or are you going to have a relative reference where you just have the name of the file? And the assumption with a relative reference is that that file that you are referring to, because remember, this is a reference to another.html from the file example.html, which currently is residing with a copy both on the server and a copy that has been sent to my laptop. The assumption is that I am referring to another.html file that is on the same server as the example.html file that I'm currently looking at, and it's also in the same folder. Now, it is possible to have different folders. So if I am viewing example.html and on the server, it's located in a directory or a folder that has a second folder or directory. Folder and directory are synonymous. And that folder's name is articles, and the articles folder has a file called another.html on it. Then you can see I can use this relative reference here. So I can say articles/another.html. So the articles slash with a slash immediately after it indicates that that's a directory or a folder. I should mention that there are operating systems that use other delimiters to indicate folders. So for example, Windows most notably uses the backslash. The Macintosh used to use colons before they got to OS X and switched over to underlying operating system being Unix. But regardless of what the underlying operating system of either the client, the web client, meaning my laptop, or the web server, meaning www.stanford.edu, regardless of the operating system for either of those, when we're talking about web stuff, we're always going to use that standard slash. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, this links to a file on the same computer, on the same server as the current file that I'm viewing, but it's in a subdirectory. It's in the article subdirectory. And this is going to actually work whether we have a relative or an absolute reference, but here I'm doing it with a relative reference. So one question that comes up is, do I want to use an absolute reference or a relative reference? And here's the thing. If I want to link to another web server, so here I'm trying to link to an article on the New York Times server, that actually needs to be done with an absolute reference. There's no way to have a relative reference from one server to another. So right there, that's one clear distinction. So I can do everything I want with absolute references. Why would I ever want to use a relative reference? Well, it turns out that there's actually a bunch of big benefits to using relative references. So one of the benefits of having relative references is that they're much more portable. And so what I mean by this is if I have a website and all the references between the different web pages on the website are using relative references, I can take all those files and those folders and move them to another computer. So here's an example of why that might be useful. So a while back, Carnegie Mellon was having financial difficulties. Actually, all the universities were. I think this was at the 2008 stock market crash. And they ended up letting all their lecturers go. Now, suppose the same thing happened to Stanford. And I had a great website that was sitting on the Stanford servers. And I had all these different files, and they were all linked together. And I ended up having to go to Harvard because Stanford was out of money and let me go. Well, if I have absolute references in this website and I take it to Harvard, which is pretty standard practice, universities typically will let you take your material with you. So I take my material, I take it to Harvard, and if I'm using absolute references in my material, that means every time I have a link from one web page to another web page within my website, it says http://web.stanford.edu, and I'm going to have to go in there and erase the Stanford and replace it with Harvard. And, I'm just going to be bawling my eyes out because, Harvard's good, but it's not Stanford. And so by using those absolute references, moving it from one server to another, I've completely broken every single reference. In contrast, if I'm using relative references, every time I refer from one web page to another web page, it doesn't have the full URL. It doesn't have web.stanford.edu. It just says, hey, there's this other file. It's in the same folder, or maybe it's in a subfolder. But those links are all still working. So I can take my entire website, I can move it to the Harvard server, and all the internal links are still working. I'm still pretty sad, of course, but at least I don't have to go in and delete all the references to Stanford and replace them with Harvard. Another advantage of relative references is relative references are shorter. That's nice from a typing standpoint. You don't have to type the http:// name of server /. It's also going to be a bit cheaper. And this can add up over time because you're serving up fewer bits, right? Those extra bits for the HTTP and the name of the server, those aren't in the files. Your HTML files are just a tad bit shorter. You're going to pay a bit less money for your bandwidth, and it'll be slightly faster. It's nice. It's not a huge win, but it is a win, and there's no cost, so it's all win. All right, so generally there's a lot of advantages to using relative references. The main reason why we use an absolute reference is, as we just saw, if you're trying to link to another web server, like if I've got a link from my Stanford website to the New York Times.com website, well, I don't really have any choice. I can't create a relative reference from one server to another. Relative references only work within a server, so use an absolute reference then. Okay, you may notice a fair number of URLs where they don't actually specify the file name. So www.stanford.edu, that says it's on the www.stanford server. It doesn't say what the file is. And, you could go to this isn't actually a real URL, so don't try this 105 students. There's actually a couple more subdirectories, but I thought I'd shorten it to keep the example simple. www.stanford.edu/CS105. It's not specifying the name of a file. And so all web servers have a particular default file that they're going to serve up. Most servers use the file index.html. So there's a file in the directory called index.html, and somebody does not specify a file name. They specify a folder name, but they don't specify a file name. The index.html is going to get served up. So that's sort of your default name. There are some other names used for this, but index.html is the most common. You may also see it, web servers, some of them use home.html, or some of them use default.html. And then in fact, some of them actually don't use .html, they just use .htm. You can actually blame Microsoft for this. Way back in the day, all files on Microsoft systems had to be named with what was called 8.3, 8 letters and 3 letters after the dot. It's pretty shocking to me. That just seems super limited, having only 8 characters, but that's the way it was. But hey, it's all good. Bill Gates seems to be doing good stuff. Plus, the building that I can't go to anymore is named after him because they donated much money for that too. But yeah, happy thoughts to Bill for his work on the philanthropy for medical purposes. Good job, Bill and Melinda. Okay, now this thing that we've been typing here, http://www.stanford.edu/another.html. This is what's referred to as a URL, or a uniform resource locator. It turns out that there's a second version of this where instead of using HTTP, you use HTTPS. This is a secure version of HTTP. We'll be talking about it in much more detail on exactly what it's all about when we spend our week talking about computer security a little bit later on down the line. It turns out that our URL, Uniform Resource Locator, is actually a subset of a much bigger standard called URI, for Uniform Resource Identifier. And there's a whole bunch of URIs, and some of these are actually kind of handy. Probably the handiest of them is the mail to URI. And you can use this to create a link on your web page where somebody clicks on a link and they mail a message to you. This does assume that the web browser is set up to use mail. And you could specify, in addition to specifying the address to send it to, you can specify other things like the subject. You can CC some people. You can put a body on there. I do want to caution you, be careful about putting email addresses up on the internet. You will notice that and by R, I mean none of the CS105 or CS106E teaching staff addresses are up there. And that's actually because there are programs that surf the web looking for email addresses and put them on spam lists. It's too late for me. I get a ton of spam. Although since the computer science department moves this to Google's G Suite, Google seems to have taken care of most of it. They also occasionally take real emails sent by students and dump it in the spam folder. So that part's not so good, but they mostly gotten rid of all the spam I get. I used to get a ton of spam all the time. And occasionally I get in lists where I would get spam messages like every 5 minutes. It was just freaking horrible. Anyway, so if you put your email address on web pages and it's clearly, obviously an email address, these programs will grab them and stuff you on spam lists. So be super cautious on there. But, if you're a business, maybe it's worth it for you to have it super convenient for people to email an email address associated with the company. So you're just going to go ahead and stick that up there. And using this mail to URI, you can make it really easy for somebody to email you. There's a bunch of other types of URIs. So there's FTP, it's Secure FTP. There's FaceTime. So you click on a link, it starts up FaceTime, and you click on a link, it starts up Skype. Gamers, there's even one that starts up Steam. So there's all sorts of different URIs up there. One of the URIs that you may see is this file URI. And in fact, if you're loading a file into the web browser and that file is on your current computer, this is basically what you're going to see. So file : / / and then the C : that's Windows for the current the main hard disk. This works when it's on your computer, but don't use it. It's specific to a specific location on your computer. It's completely not portable. So we talked about how relative links are portable. This is completely not portable. And one of the things that it being completely not portable is going to cause you problems is when you take your files, you zip them up and submit them for your homework assignments, and the TA unzips them on their computer, those files are no longer in the same location as they were when you zipped them up. And so this is going to completely break all your stuff for grading purposes. So, generally don't use it. It's a bad idea. And it's especially a bad idea for our class because you'll lose points for grading. That's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to take a look at how to style our links, changing the colors and changing the appearance of them. I'll see you then.